Thanks for coming back to the channel, and we're doing another one on the Wing Rack today, and boy did that first video do pretty well. It's almost at 200,000 views in the first month, which is incredible, so thanks to everyone who watched it and shared it, and to all the folks who left all the great questions, and we're going to answer some of those today, so let's get started. So there were naturally a lot of questions about Dante and how it's implemented, and the first one here is AES 50? Dante, no? Well, yeah, there is a lot of Dante in this actually, just not natively. You've either got to put the expansion card in the rear or install the Dante chip into that internal spot that I showed you in the previous video. Here's a great question. Is the internally installable Dante module the same as on the X Dante card? Now, the Wing takes the Brooklyn 2 card, and I believe that's the same chip that's on the X Dante card. If you know that I'm incorrect there, please let us know in the comments which chip it is, but I believe it is the Brooklyn 2, and Behringer offers the firmware to flash those on the product page for the Wing. So I believe that's a yes. A bit confused on the Dante card slots. Is the slot you showed inside the cabinet where a Dante Brooklyn card can be installed instead of replacing the SD card adapter in the external slot? Yes, that's exactly correct. So you can either get the entire expansion card with the Brooklyn chip on it and put that in the expansion slot, or you can just install a Brooklyn chip internally and then keep your expansion slot available for other uses. Another one here, does the Wing Rack come with the Dante card, or do I need to purchase separately? All the Dante stuff on this is a separate purchase. I've got one here. I looked for the internal Dante card last week and only found one kind of sketchy retailer online. Everywhere else either didn't list the product or was out of stock. The best way to get a hold of one of these is to call your local dealer. So an official dealer for Music Tribe equipment that you can get on the phone in your region. That'd be my recommendation anyway. I'm not actually sure if the Dante cards are still backed up from Audinate, but there's also the possibility that Behringer themselves are waiting on those chips. And another one, can you install both the internal card and the option slot card for lots of Dante? And I believe the answer to that is yes. You can see here in the patching window, the card I currently have in the option slot is shown here as the Wing Live Playback patching. And you can see the module patching right next to it where you would patch the internal card. So if you replace the Wing Live card with a Dante card, that patching should show up there, and the internal modules patching should show up right next to it once that's installed. This person asks, no touchscreen, which kind of says to me maybe they just didn't watch the video, because this mixer is more touchscreen than anything else. And that's pretty obvious from the last video. Yes, in fact, that huge screen that I'm touching throughout the whole video is a touchscreen. This is a question that I've been actually wondering about as well ever since I moved the Wing Rack off my desk and into a rack next to my desk. And that's, I was wondering if one could separate the rear I/O from the actual display. Why would I want to do this? Because I want the GUI to be on the top shelf of the rack, and I want the I/O to be at the rear, at the bottom. We're just talking about a 1 meter cable, but does anyone know what cable that is? So from what I can see inside of this, there's just this single loom going between the actual box and the front panel, which essentially is detachable. If you take the rack ears off, they kind of pin in the top of the tilting mechanism. Obviously, you're not supposed to take it off. It's not made for that, but I may do some investigation into what's inside of that loom in the future, and I might do an update or maybe a member video about that, depending on what I can come up with, but I would think you could do that. Stupid question, can you plug passive speakers on the aux outputs? You mentioned they are amplified outputs. I should have been more clear, perhaps. They are labeled as headphone outputs, and they are amplified for that purpose. So as much as a headphone is a passive speaker, which of course it is, you can do that, but no, you can't plug in like stereo speakers or a stage monitor or anything like that. They're intended to drive headphones and in-ear monitors. There were plenty more questions about those headphone outputs too, and about 1 million people asked if those headphone outputs are fully assignable or assignable on their own, and I pinned a response saying that the answer to that is no. Those headphone outputs are tied to the XLR outputs, so whatever shows up on one shows up on the other. I thought I had shown that kind of clearly in the last video on the output patching screen, but of course if you're not familiar with the Wing and what that looks like, you may have missed it because I didn't call it out specifically. So the XLR outputs on the back and those headphone outputs that are underneath them are tied together. So whatever you patch to XLR outputs 1 and 2, for example, become mix 1 and 2 on those headphone outputs. Back to Dante again. I've been wondering if that internal Dante card means preamp control of Dante stage boxes and everything. So the answer to that right now is no. That internal Dante card works just like it would if you had it in the option slot, and it just allows you to patch in or out of those 64 channels. The Dante card is 64 by 64, and that's what you get control of. In order to have control over the head amps and phantom power and things like that, you would have to have collaboration between Music Tribe and all of the manufacturers that build those boxes in a similar way that Yamaha and Shure worked together to make the wireless microphones appear on Yamaha mixers so you can control and see some more of what's going on with them. Now, of course, you can patch from other Dante devices, so if you had a Yamaha stage box, you could use it. You would just need Yamaha's R Remote software on a laptop or something to be able to control those head amps. So that's the answer to that, and I don't expect it's going to change anytime soon, but I could always be wrong. It's crazy what functionality you can get these days from a couple of tiny circuit boards, a studio and a chip thing. Amazing.
It's truly amazing. A portable television studio.
Richard 1977 writes, still waiting for a 19-inch rack mount version with faders. Well, Richard, the day they released this, they released the Wing Compact, which is a 19-inch rack mount version with faders. So check that out. It's over on their website and it's almost identical as far as what it can do under the hood. Check it out, Wing Compact. You mentioned 48 channels, but I only saw 24 actual inputs on the back. Where do the other inputs come from? Is this limited to just 12 stereo input devices? So we talked about this a little bit in the previous video, how many inputs you have to choose from. And I think the official count here on the website is 382 different input sources that you can connect. And there are those 24 analog inputs, which would make your 12 stereo channels that you're asking about built in on the back of the unit. Then you can fill out the rest of the channels with either the networked audio inputs, the AES-50 ports here on the back, Stage Connect modules if you have those, or something like a Dante card, which we've talked about pretty extensively in this episode. But if you don't have any of that, if you never do anything with networked audio, remember this is also a USB audio interface. So you've got 48 channels back from your computer that you can assign to channels on this and use to play back in a live setting or for whatever other reason you might need to do that. You've also got playback from the SD card recorder if you want to do that. You can also play back, I think, 4 channels from the USB 4 channels from the USB port on the front of the unit. So yeah, if you never do anything with networked audio or you never buy any stage boxes, you would still have plenty of other sources to choose from, especially if you're doing anything with computers or synths and things like that. This could be really powerful to get a lot of channels back out of a computer into a real mixer without having to do a whole bunch of extra conversions. So hopefully that answers that question. Can this fully work with Apple Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro? Please give me some hints. Now, I've got to be honest, when people ask questions like this, I genuinely don't know what you're asking. This is a 48 channel by 48 channel USB audio interface that works with Mac and works with Windows and Linux. I'm using it with DaVinci Resolve. So if there's something specific about Final Cut or Logic Pro that you're asking, let me know. And besides this one, there were a number of other questions with like a laundry list of gear and very vague, like help me set this up or will my gear work with this? And those would be good questions to ask your sales rep at a dealer if you're considering buying one, but I unfortunately can't go through all of those. I just don't have time. I hope to make an AVB card for this so I can integrate my Motu gear. So currently there's the Dante card, and then they're also working on a MADI card, I believe, and a Waves SoundGrid card. So I don't think there's an AVB card in the works, but I don't really know. And a few people were also very curious about the possibility of getting an ADAT card for these. And I honestly don't think you're going to see that happen. Although the folks that are using ADAT will be disappointed. If you're one of them at this point, seeing what I'm seeing coming out for mixing boards like this and what's coming out in the future, I would highly suggest, if you have any mission critical ADAT gear, to pick up something like this Ferrofish Verto 32 that can get that converted and onto the Dante network. And then you'll be able to use it with all the gear and not have to worry about individual support, because it's just becoming an increasingly small number of people that need that. So adding it into mixers like this is just happening less and less often. And honestly, if you look at the Verto 32, I would just go ahead and get the 64 channel. It's only a couple $100 more to go 64 by 64 on the ADAT, and then you've got full support for anything you could ever need. And if you don't have enough ADAT gear to justify this price, if you're looking at this going like, that's crazy, that's the cost of this mixer we're talking about, then I would seriously, personally consider moving away from that ADAT gear that I have, sell it now while it still has some value, and move on to equipment that has some more modern networked digital inputs and outputs, so you don't have to worry so much about this kind of thing going forward. So a few people asked, why not make the USB port USB-C? USB-B is old. And I would imagine the most logical explanation for that is the fact that they have that board with the USB-B and the dual network cards in production. It works, it provides everything you need for this, and redesigning that would add unnecessary cost to an item that really doesn't need it. A number of folks were less than pleased to see that this board was still maxing out at 48K, but I think we all know, if you've been following Music Tribe, that to go above that, you're going to be into their Midas products. And so far, there is no Midas version of the Wing. The Wing's been out a good few years now, and there doesn't seem to be anything moving in that camp. Can we use it as a stage box on stage for monitor independent mix, EQ, and compression, and use Midas M32R via AES for front of house and have independent channel EQ comp for front of house? So there's a video that's playing right now that I did about sharing a full-size Wing with an X32, and it's going to be exactly the same process with the Wing Rack and an M32. So check that out in my playlist, and you will definitely be able to do that. Is this overkill for a dedicated drum mixer? No. How to use Waves SoundGrid with AOIP input, audio over IP input. And if I wasn't clear before, everything I said about Dante applies to the Waves SoundGrid. They're going to have an expansion slot option, and they're also going to have an internal module for Waves SoundGrid. And of course, there were a lot of people curious about pricing and availability, and I think now more than ever that depends on where in the world you are. So I'm going to have to tell you one more time that it's best to check with your local dealer.